Welcome to another video from North Keppel Island Environmental Education Centre. Here we have some footage taken by a drone in a 0.2 metre tide. This is very low for these conditions. This was taken just off of Reef Beach in the intertidal zone. In an intertidal zone there's three different zones. The first one is the supralittoral zone, also known as the splash zone. This is an area above the high tide line on coastlines, and it's regularly splashed like on a high tide but not submerged by ocean water. Now anybody who's visited North Keppel Island Environmental Education Centre, you can sort of see where the cabins are that the students stay in, and sort of just in front of that, in front of the vegetation, is where that splash zone is. On a king tide or perhaps some sort of cyclonic event, occasionally we'll get water that comes up over that vegetation and then under the cabins. The next zone is the littoral zone, often referred to as the middle intertidal zone. The littoral zone is an area where you'll find majority of the aquatic plants, since they need sunlight to grow. The littoral zone is also important as it's a habitat for fish. Lots of shorebirds, so beachstone curlews, cormorants, ospreys and many other types of birds. The littoral zone is also home to a lot of marine invertebrates because the plants give them refuge from the predators, and there's an abundance of food available. Much of which is what we're looking at in the image here. And this footage is very fast, but we're currently flying over that littoral zone. You can see a lot of that algae overgrowth just as we get a bit lower. There's bits of coral that are exposed. In amongst that coral, we should be seeing barnacles that are really dominant, mussels, lots and lots of seaweeds. You can see there that in amongst a lot of those rock pools, there's a variety of different sea snails and gastropods. Gastropods include organisms like snails and slugs, a lot of those which seek shelter, and also just being out of the sun and staying in those little rock pools. There's very harsh conditions out there. As well, we have what we call a bivalve, which include organisms like clams, oysters and scallops. There's lots of black-lipped oysters which are on the higher tide mark of this drone footage. Gastropods have a single coiled shell, whereas bivalves have two shells or valves that fit together. Together these two groups are very diverse. There's around 80,000 gastropod species and around 9,000 bivalve species. Just that drone really fastly moving over there, but it stops on another one of those rock pools. You can see that staghorn coral and down the bottom right, definitely got that brown colour. There it is again. Moving along, going a little bit higher, just all in the littoral zone right now. A lot of this 0.2 is extremely low, but when the tides are sort of back to normal, all of this will be back underwater until such time as the tide goes back out again. So it looks like we're just backing it up here, going a little higher. Still lots of that seaweed cover over the corals and the rocks. Okay, that drone is starting to come up now, and what you'll find is that we're entering a different zone. This is called the sublittoral zone. Good way to remember it, submarine. It means it's always underwater. So you can see there that really large body of water. This area always stays underwater. Now, because it always stays underwater, that means different things live in that area. Now this is just a good flyover. It's going right back. So we've gone from the sublittoral. We're moving up now. We've paused a little bit in the littoral zone. And we'll continue our journey higher up into the spray zone. Now you have to think about some of the adaptations for these organisms to live in these areas. We talk about two types of adaptations. One is structural and the other is behavioural. For example, when we talk about some structural adaptations for a crab, their claws are very hard, and their carapace, the spikes, make the crab hard to eat. The flat carapaces can squeeze under the rocks, and bumpy carapaces are also, they provide good camouflage. Their legs can be short, they can tuck under the body to avoid predators. Long legs allows them to run quickly over rocky ground. If they're up high in that littoral zone, they can paddle on the back legs to enable them to swim. But then we can also think about some of their behavioural adaptations, like seeking shelter under rocks. If you go up close to one of them, they won't stick around, they'll just try hide. And also, even with soldier crabs, safety in numbers. You can see up to thousands of them down on Maisie Bay, just so they've got a better chance of surviving out in these harsh conditions of the intertidal zone. Also, along a lot of these zones, we've got lots of oysters. They're filter feeders. They have shells in two hinge sections. There's ones of white and grey colour predominantly. This is a good shot here, just going up nice and high. You can just see how low that tide really is. Yeah, as we continue to climb, also we have limpets on the rocks. They can be found on the lower edge of the beach rock, but they're usually in larger numbers further out in the littoral zone. We have small black ones and we have some larger ones. So there's a really good shot there. You can see clearly where the splash zone is, the spray zone at the top. Turning the camera around now, right in the littoral zone, and then really on this low 0.2 you can see where the sub-littoral zone is, so where it always stays wet. So I must have the drone up really high now. I touched on gastropods earlier. Basically any shell that has an asymmetrical spiral. That functions as a retreat instead of a shield. There's many of these at North Keppel Island. An example of this would be the mulberry snail or the oyster borer, a predator that feeds on other mollusks. It has a radula with fewer teeth, and it's used to drill through the shells of prey. There's also some acid secretions that also soften the shell also. Just lowering that drone now, right there on the littoral zone. In amongst this area we'd find lots of turban shells. They're in a sort of grey colour, they're herbivores. We also have lots of trochus shells or top shells. They feed on detritus and algae. They range in colour in this, particularly on this intertidal zone, and patterns with sort of textured conical shapes, slightly flattened with a sharp edge. We often see chitons and abalones or ear shells. They're well camouflaged and they're patterned. The lower edge has a series of holes for respiration. Quite often in the intertidal zone, actually in the littoral zone just over where we're flying now, we'll see sea cucumbers. They're filter feeders. We'll also see the likes of tube worms, and not just your hard corals such as boulder corals, staghorn, brain coral. We'll see lots of soft corals as well. Those hard corals that we're predominantly just flying over here, you can see them sticking out in amongst the seaweed. They're found in rock pools. They look sort of like a leopard skin with like a rich brown colour. The brain coral in particular, they feed at night with tentacles and they sting and catch plankton. We've also got different branching corals. You can see one at the top there, we're just flying over it. That one's called a staghorn coral. Quite often we'll see sponges and the occasional hermit crab. Hey, we've come to the end of our drone footage. I hope you've enjoyed that and you've learned a thing or two about it. It's really good to see an intertidal zone that low. Not often does it get low as a 0.2. If this really interested you, I recommend checking out our other video. We did a 150 metre transact line that we ran over this same reef, and we placed a quadrat down every 5 metres. That could be some really helpful information for your assessment. But thank you for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe to the page. You can also find us on Facebook, and stay tuned for further videos this week.